Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to do another IEM shootout. This is going to cover a number of IEMs that I didn't get a chance to go over with the last IEM shootout that I did, which was the Campfire audio. But it does include some IEMs that I've covered in the past. I'm going to talk about a number of them and try and focus on the price ranges here. These are high-end IEMs, so we go all the way from $700 up to $2,000, and I will make an effort to compare within the price categories. Just a quick note before we get started, these were all provided by headphones.com, so if you guys want to check out what people are saying in the community section, you can go and check out the forum, and otherwise I will leave links to the products in the description below. Okay, so let's get started. On the left we have the least expensive, and on the right we have the most expensive. So as we move to the right, we'll be going up in price. When doing any IEM comparison, it's really important to keep in mind that everybody does have a different shape to their ear canal, and so the types of tips that you use will impact the way that these IEMs sound. And so my statements here are not going to be definitive across the board, because you may find that with a certain ear tip, it may completely change the frequency response for your ear canal and your ear shape, so that what I'm saying here, my descriptions here, are no longer applicable to the way that it sounds to you. If you have found the ultimate combination for a specific IEM that really works for you, that's great, and I'm not here to say anything negative about that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case for everybody. So let's jump right in here, starting with the Empire Ears Bravado. Now, this is a $700 IEM. What I really like about Empire Ears is I actually really like their design for the shape and for the materials. These always feel very solid to me, and I always find that they're very comfortable for me. Now with this particular unit, this is a balanced armature and dynamic driver hybrid. Of course, you use a dynamic driver to handle the bass frequencies, and with the Bravado, it's an absolute bass monster. There's no other way to say it. In my mind, there's too much bass here. This is actually a very V-shaped IEM, but it's not without its detail retrieval capabilities. Not only is the tonality for the bass emphasized, but it's also got intense macro dynamics and slam here in the bass. If you know me, I don't generally expect that from IEMs, but of course certain dynamic driver IEMs make that, the perception of that, possible. And with the Bravado, it definitely does so. My only criticism here is that the bass does bleed into the mid-range a little bit, so it's not quite as clean as it could be. And thankfully the treble does come back, but there is a fairly notable mid-range recession here, and then when the treble does come back, it is a little bit on the lean side. Now with that said, I actually find that this is still fairly well extended in the treble, and I don't feel like it's particularly rolled off. For those of you guys who want something that is kind of like a step up from that Polaris V2, if you want something that's still a similar kind of sound signature that emphasizes the bass but does a little bit better as far as sub bass and the treble frequencies, this would be a good candidate. Just a quick note though about the carrying case that it comes with. This is really, really heavy. I wouldn't put this in a jacket pocket or anything. This requires a backpack. But nonetheless, that's pretty much how I hear the Bravado. And so if that sounds like something that you're looking for, again, maybe if you're into EDM or popular modern genres, and also are looking for something that would work as a commuter IEM, this is a solid candidate for that. Moving up to the Massdrop X Empire Ears Zeus. I've reviewed this IEM already, so if you guys want to check out that video, you'll know what I have to say about it. But this comes in at around $750 when it's on sale, which it should be consistently from Massdrop, or now drop.com. As the name suggests, this is a 14 balanced armature IEM. I know they say that this is the specifically curated and hand-picked Knowles BA drivers in here, and you can actually see them because the housing here is a little bit translucent. But whatever they've chosen to go with here, while it has all kinds of crazy detail, it unfortunately suffers more than any other IEM the balanced armature timbre. If you are unsure what that is, listen to this. It's sort of this metallic smearing or straining effect that can actually obscure some of the crazy detail retrieval that this thing does actually have. Now, with that said, with the default tips that came in here, which is the final E tips, it was absolute treble murder, and I don't recommend using buying this with the intention of using those default tips, unless they somehow miraculously work for you, because they certainly didn't work for me. I recommend instead using the foam tips, and when you do that, it fixes so much about the tonality. You instead get a much more balanced sound signature that it makes it so that the treble is much smoother. It's not as splashy and compressed sounding, and it's also not quite as sharp or painful in those upper frequencies. Nonetheless, I have to still also criticize the bass frequencies here. It's a very lean sounding IEM, but the plus side here is that it does outperform its price when it comes to strict detail retrieval and separation and technical ability. So if that's your key requirement, then this does do quite well. I just think it's only particularly suited to those genres that would benefit from a brighter tuning, like, for example, acoustic music, jazz music, classical music, which happens to be the stuff that I like to listen to. So I do find myself actually using this frequently and gravitating more towards this than something like the Bravado, for example. And the case is much more manageable, thankfully. Now, moving up to the Meze Rai Penta. Now, this comes in at around $1,100. This is a 4 balanced armature and 1 dynamic driver configuration. It is slightly warm sounding, slightly rolled off in the treble, but in general, it actually has a fairly well-balanced sound signature. I don't find that instruments sound off or anything like that. It's just not quite as resolving in the treble. It doesn't have quite that same level of transparency and detail. If you are willing to spend $1,100 on an IEM and you want something that's a little bit warmer than the traditional Campfire Andromeda kind of sound signature, this would be an interesting candidate. I just wish that it did a little bit better as far as its technical performance. The one thing that I have to point out here that they've absolutely nailed better than anybody else is the look and feel. Even more so than the Empire ears. These look and feel extremely premium, and they are also incredibly comfortable. Leave it to Meze to make all of their products ridiculously comfortable, look pretty interesting, and have some sort of sleek and stylish design. I just, again, wish that the technical performance here was a little bit better, and that the treble didn't roll off the way that it does. Of course, this is a fantastic carrying case. It's a little on the large side, but you notice how it's a little bit thinner, so it's actually easier to fit into a jacket pocket. With the Meze Rai Penta, your best bet would be to actually use this with silicon tips over the foam tips to get a little bit more of the technical performance that using silicon tips often does provide. I find that with the foam tips, because the foam is porous, you do lose a little bit of the attack and the speed. Now, before moving on to the Campfire Solaris, let's talk about what's in the back here, which is the Westone W80. Now, for the most part, all of these IEMs are doing something different or unique from each other or from one another, such that it's worth talking about them and comparing them. But out of all of these, the one that sounds the weirdest to me is actually the Westone W80. And if anybody knows what Westone IEM sounds like, you will know what I'm talking about. This is a mid-forward, muffled sounding IEM. When you first hear this, you go, what the hell? You immediately know that it's not like the rest of the things that you're listening to, and you probably won't like it. That's at least the impression that I think most people get. Just to be more specific about what this is an 8 balanced armature IEM, and again, it's extremely dark sounding. It's very mid-forward, lower mid-forward, very bassy. Westone has always had this idea that if you think about your bass tones and your treble tones, the theory or the thinking is that we should emphasize the instruments that fall in between, and so that happens to be your 200 hertz to 1K, and that's where you get, at least to my ear, the most noticeable emphasis. Now, unfortunately, a frequency response that does this kind of thing does not lend itself all that well to clarity for the human ear. But if you have heard these before and you understand what they're trying to do, if you understand that they are trying to emphasize the regions of the frequency response, or the frequency response range where most of your instruments are actually being played, or most of the instruments actually occur, then that's fine. You can go with that. I just think that at $1,500, which is what this costs, you would probably be better suited, most people, I think, would be better suited going for Campfire Solaris. Now, that's not to say that this is without detail. It does have a lot of detail there. It has all the technical abilities that you would expect from an 8-balanced armature IEM. It's just that the tonality and frequency response is so mid-centric and mid-forward, not in the kind of way like ZMF is mid-forward and mid-centric. This is mid-forward and mid-centric in a way that's more like the AudioQuest Nighthawk. Or Night Owl, right? So your treble and your sub bass are not really all that present because they're being drowned out by all this lower mid-range presence. And in my mind, I don't like that. If you are not on the West Tone train, this will not change your mind. Lastly, with the W80, it gives you literally every possible accessory you could ever imagine in that box. It's nuts. Nonetheless, we're here for how things sound. So let's move on to the Campfire Solaris. The Solaris comes in also at around $1,500, and you get a 3-balanced armature, 1 dynamic driver configuration here. So it's also a hybrid configuration, similar to what was going on with the Bravado, and actually similar to the Ripenta. But with the Solaris, you get a frequency response here that's actually a ton of fun. First of all, this has some of the absolute best treble resolution and treble detail out of any IEM I've ever heard. And that, yes, competes with the 64 audio stuff. It doesn't beat it, but it's up there with some of the best. So that means that it's extremely well extended. You get all the finer little details in the treble and in the upper treble as well. The mid-range has a little bit of an odd congested sound to me, but for most music I don't mind it. And then the bass here is, because of the high excursive capabilities of the dynamic driver, it is awesome. Now, the bass is not, again, it's not as clean as I would like. And it's not, the transition between the bass and the mid-range is a little bit thicker than I prefer for some of my music. But a lot of my music, especially the stuff that's maybe not recorded quite as well, does really well on this. And then on top of it, the technical ability of this IEM is great. And the only main complaint that I have here is, again, that the bass is not as clean as it could be, even though it's a ton of fun. If anybody wants to have their mind changed about what's possible with bass and treble in an IEM, this is a strong candidate for doing that. Now, it's not the best, but this is, in my mind, one of those IEMs that makes you question the degree of difference between high-performing IEMs and full-sized over-ear headphones. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that it beats full-sized headphones, but this is the kind of IEM that makes you ask that question. And at $1,500, I actually think that it's fairly well priced, especially when you consider it's only a little bit more expensive than the Andromeda, and I think this is a lot more fun than the Andromeda. Moving on to the Noble Audio Katana and Noble Audio Kaiser Encore. These are both very similar IEMs, similar in their technical performance, and they're also around the same price. They both come in at roughly $1,800. I believe the Katana uses a 9-balanced armature configuration, and the Kaiser Encore uses a 10-balanced armature configuration. And I find that for both of them, they are relatively neutral sounding. They both have good technical ability. They both are highly detailed. But with the Kaiser Encore, it feels like the consonant range is emphasized a little bit more. Whereas with the Katana, the lower treble, there's something a little bit weird with the lower treble where there's a bit more of an elevation going on there. Now, again, this is where, depending on your sensitivity to lower treble emphasis in IEMs, that may or may not make you prefer one over the other. In my mind, the Katana is maybe less fatiguing, but the Kaiser Encore is probably a little bit more normal sounding, especially over time. But both of these have a bit of a problem, and it's that the Solaris exists. And that's not to say that these are bad IEMs. They're actually both fairly normal sounding to me, again, with the right tips and everything. And when I was evaluating these and testing them, I was able to enjoy both of them. However, I feel that they are not as competitively priced as the Campfire Solaris, and they're both not as good in the bass as the Campfire Solaris, again, because these are using strictly BA drivers, and the Solaris uses that high excursion dynamic driver for the bass frequencies, and you can really tell. So, while they might both be pretty good from a frequency response perspective, from a technical ability perspective, I much prefer the Solaris just because it has that extra fun quality in the bass. And then I also find that the Solaris is better extended in the treble. So your treble resolution and detail actually is better here, even though the consonant range has a bit more energy on the Kaiser 10 Encore. It feels like for the Kaiser 10 Encore, that consonant range emphasis also causes a little bit of a splashy quality to the cymbals, and they end up being a little bit muddled up there. Whereas with the Solaris, you don't have that problem. You have the frequency response for the Solaris, and the treble is just, I find, a little bit more well balanced. With the Katana, I am particularly sensitive to that lower treble emphasis, but I find that the consonant range here is maybe a little bit more agreeable for my preferences, because I am a bit sensitive to that as well. And I also find that it doesn't result in this somewhat splashy quality for cymbals. And so in my mind, yeah, I think they both do reasonably well, and they both have their own sort of sound signature to them. It's just that for the price, I would rather get the Solaris. And then importantly, $1,800 is really not that far off from the 64 Audio U12T. Now, this is the best IEM I've ever heard, by a long shot. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the best ever. Maybe there's some stuff out there that I haven't heard. I know that the Z1R is getting a lot of attention, and it's probably worth listening to that one as well if you're going to be spending a ton of money on a flagship IEM. But what this does is it makes it difficult to invest a ton of money into any other of these flagship IEMs. If you're spending $1,500 on an IEM, it's probably worth also listening to this and asking yourself if this is worth the extra $400 or $500 or whatever it is over the other thing that you were going to get. And in this case, it might be the Campfire Solaris or the Noble Audio Katana or Kaiser Encore. And in my mind, the 64 Audio U12T beats everything on the table by enough where it is actually worth the extra money. So for anybody who is looking at investing in any of these, also just listen to this and see if it answers that question for you as well. But as the name suggests, this is a 12 balanced armature configuration here, and they're using what they call the TIA driver. Now that's changed what, in my opinion, has been a limitation on BA focused IEMs, specifically for the bass. And this demonstrates that, yes, it is possible to do exceptional bass with a balanced armature IEM. And then on top of it, everything else about the tonality and frequency response here is great. And it's not as laid back or relaxed as maybe some people would like for certain genres and certain types of music. Definitely if you're listening to more upbeat or aggressive music, this may be a little bit fatiguing over time. But the detail retrieval in the treble here is better than everything else I've heard, including the Solaris. And I love the Solaris's treble response. So the extension here is unbelievably good. It is almost a little bit too much. While all of the detail retrieval and resolution is spot on with it, the edges of certain percussive instruments seem to emphasize the definition of those instruments a little bit more than I think would be natural if you were to listen to a live recording or just listen to it in person. But that extra clarity is a ton of fun to listen to. It's almost as if all these other companies who are making IEMs are aspiring to come up with something like this. And these guys have already figured it out with the U12T. So out of all of these, in my mind, this still has the best technical performance, the best detail retrieval, the best everything. It also has the best extension. It maybe doesn't have quite the same intensity for macro dynamics in the bass as the Campfire Solaris or the Empire Ears Bravado, because again, it is using a balanced armature driver, but it doesn't come across as a limitation here. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that because of where the bass is and how it's handled here, it's cleaner, it's tighter, and it's still impactful and a ton of fun. So this, in my mind, changes the game for high performance IEMs. For anything that gets close to this, you got to really ask yourself, well, how far away from the performance is it? And then think about whether or not it's worth spending the extra money. And for me, if you're looking at $1,500, it is. But that's not to say that everybody is going to prefer this type of tuning over something like the Campfire Solaris, because again, the Solaris is a lot more fun in the bass. It's a little bit bigger in the bass. It's not quite as intense for the treble, while still having exceptionally good treble resolution here. Now, neither of them are particularly sibilant, but in my mind, the overall detail and resolution of the 64 Audio U12T just wins. It's the more audiophile tuning, it's the more neutral tuning, at least to my ear, whereas the Solaris is the guilty pleasure fun IEM, even though it really does stand in a class of its own for the treble resolution and detail above everything except for the U12T. So if I had to choose IEMs in the price ranges for the ones that I have on the table here, the sub 1000 category for Empire ears, I would actually go with the Master X Zeus 14 over the Bravado, but there are going to be people who prefer this kind of V-shaped sound with unbelievably crazy slam for the bass. Yeah, if you're into that, then you'd probably prefer the Bravado. For the $1,100 IEMs or $1,000 IEMs between the Rye Penta and the Campfire Andromeda, which I have it over there, but it's not on the table here, just I ran out of space. I go with the Andromeda. I just have a hard time with the treble roll-off that this has, even though, again, it sounds very normal. The Rye Penta sounds like Meze's older and 99 classic, so it's got that warm, slightly bass-emphasized sound, but nothing is really out of balance when it comes to the frequency response and tonality. It's just that, yeah, the overall treble extension and resolution just isn't there with it the way that I would want. And then moving up to the $1,500 range, the W80 versus the Solaris. The Solaris, in my mind, is just head and shoulders above the W80 because it's a much more normal sound signature, whereas the W80 is just this really lower mid focused sound, almost muffled sound for the uninitiated, and then it takes a good couple of days to adjust to the way that sounds. If you're already on the West Tone train, then by all means, but I strongly would prefer the Campfire Solaris at that price. It's just, in my mind, it's just so much more fun. Now, moving up to the Noble Audio $1,800 range, I struggle with this a little bit just because if you spend a little bit more, you're up into the U12T territory, and it's so worth it. And it's not really all that close, in my opinion. The U12T is just head and shoulders above everything else on this table. And of course, it's the most expensive, so we should expect that. But in my mind, if I had to pick, it would be the Solaris and the U12T. I think I would go with the U12T still, but part of me, the guilty pleasure part of me, and the commuter side of things, may enjoy the Solaris more for certain tracks. Anything that benefits from the slam qualities of the dynamic driver in here would be a lot of fun to listen to with this as well. Okay, so that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one.